Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. Today, we're going to talk about It Takes a Whole Adult to Read the Whole Child. I have the expert guest, Lindsay Titus. Various things that we're going to talk about are just behavior change practices that help to re-energize yourself in the classroom. Lots of different tools and strategies that Lindsay has worked on over the years to help classroom teachers and herself as a classroom teacher. So, Lindsay, you have more than 18 years of experience doing this work, so I'll let you spend a little bit more time introducing yourself, and then we'll get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I am super excited to dive in. So again, as mentioned, I'm Lindsay Titus. I am a educator, yes, going into my gosh, year 19 or 20, kind of lost count, with a lot of expertise in behavior change. Welcome everybody. There's going to be a lot of information here, and one of the great things of training and presentations and webinars is that there's a lot of information. Kind of the downside is I'm not going to be able to go as deep or as thorough as I would. This is information that I've been studying for, well, years at this point, but it's when I really think about those things that have truly helped me fall back in love with the field of education and fall back in love with who I am as a person, getting to experience the field of education. This is really what comes through for me. So that's really when I think about the whole adult, that's where we have to start. We hear a lot about reaching the whole child and being able to read them and teach them and understand their behaviors. But none of that can happen until we can do the same for ourselves first. And so that's really what we are going to be diving into today. So again, thank you for being here. It is truly an honor anytime I get to speak with educators. It fuels, my cup. It fills my cup because it's just an exciting kind of momentum builder to kind of know that there's people that, are in this field and want to also make sure to be increasing their purpose and passion, both inside and outside of the classroom. So thank you for being here. And most importantly, thank you for being you. Part of the reason I do this is what's here on the screen. I think as educators, we are so used to serving others, but it's also important to serve ourselves. When it comes to our why, I always say there's two types of whys you need to have. One is your service why, in kind of why do we do the work that we do? But the other part of that is your selfish why. Selfishly, what are you doing for your life, for you? It is okay to honor that. That is something I have made a priority for myself. And so, of course, on both of my why list, service and selfish, family ultimately comes first. It is my anchor. These are the people that comfort me, that make me laugh, that remind me to have fun with life, even on those more difficult days. The other part that really helps keep me grounded is some of the practices we're going to talk about here is, positive self-talk, reflection, being one with the thoughts in my head, because those truly do lead to then the action steps that we take. So remembering and recognizing both your service why and your selfish why is really key to understanding and loving the work that we do each and every day. So I'm going to start with just a really quick story about this quote right here. So I started in the classroom about 18 years ago, 19 years ago. I thought I knew what I was doing, quickly determined that I did not know what I was doing. And so very quickly, I started to read all the books and go to conferences and go to trainings. Social media wasn't as big back then as it is now, but I just remember trying to soak up all this information. And I went to one training early on in my first year, and I sat through the training like I was feeling good. I was like, okay, I'm going to walk away with some strategies. Like, I think I've got a plan for next week. Here we go. And all of a sudden, this quote comes on the board, and it's, "You're the strongest tool in your toolbox." And it was meant to be like a motivational statement. But for me, I just felt myself almost like be defeated. Like I was just like, but I don't know who I am. Like if I'm the strongest tool, I had no confidence, right? Nothing was working in my classroom this year so far. Nothing was really, happening. And I'm like, well, that's great. If I'm supposed to be the strongest tool, then I'm stuck and I don't know what to do. And it took me a little bit to kind of figure out what was I going to do, but I did. But I love to share this because it really is true. Who you are at your core is the strongest thing that we can hold on to, because you are you, and you get to bring that into whether it's your classroom or your school setting or simply life in general. And I think that is so, so important. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about things to not only fill your toolbox, but we're going to do it literally and figuratively. So my hope is that you walk away with some understanding, some different ways of thinking about things, or maybe just some reminders. But during the whole thing, I hope you recognize that the power of being you truly is the foundational piece to the work that we do each and every day. Because evidence-based strategies, which we hear so much about, and they are so, so important, they've still got to begin with connection and being able to connect person to person. Now, that could be teacher to student, that could be building student to student connections, that could be teacher to teacher, it could be teacher to staff, it could be teacher to parents. It doesn't matter, right? When you've got a human being and a human being, you've got connection. And those evidence-based strategies still begin with that. The other thing that I think is really important, because I know this tripped me up for so, so long, is that evidence-based strategies are not synonymous with perfection, meaning they don't work perfectly every single time we use them. And I thought they did, right? I'd go and I would read this book, or I'd do this training about how great this evidence-based strategy is. And I would say, yeah, I agree 100%. Then I'd go in my classroom next week and it didn't work, or it didn't work in the way that I thought it would, or it didn't, the visualization didn't match, what actually was happening. And over the years, I've realized it's because we're working with human beings. I'm a human being, my students are human beings, and therefore it's not necessarily about perfection. I believe perfection is in the present moment, it's not something to attain, but they are not synonymous with perfection. They're simply things we get to practice every single day so that we see that growth and expansion. We take all this information, recognizing that it truly is you, right? At your core, you matter as you are right now, with what you have right now and where you are right now. That matters most because you matter. When I stopped trying to play the chase game and chasing the thing I thought I had to have, or the thing I thought I needed to do to help both behaviors in my classroom and instruction in my classroom, and I started to focus on me, the behaviors started to shift. And the teaching became a little bit easier. And the learning and the light bulbs in those moments that I went into teaching for started to appear. But they really started to appear when I started to really shift and flip the narrative to, well, I do matter, and who I am matters as both, teacher Lindsay, but more importantly, human being Lindsay. And so that's really what we're going to kind of talk about today in the next, few minutes or so. But, again, short time frame, we're going to kind of burst through this information. My hope is that, something that, that light bulb may be for you, you can then dive a little bit deeper in it, but hopefully it's going to bring some ideas and some clarity that you can use in the future. So I could not talk about behavior without touching really briefly on traditional behavior management, because this really sets the stage for what I believe was the catalyst to true behavior change in my classroom. So traditional behavior management is really these things. It's typically a one-size-fits-all model. It's generally adult-led and externally focused. We're driven by trying to eliminate certain behaviors. It's ultimately a surface level, and it's not very inclusive. And so these are some of the things that then you may see in traditional behavior management, right? The point charts, simply talking about rules, putting out fires, really teacher-led, the clip chart, right? So very externally driven, kind of whole class oriented. The reason that, wrong way. There we go. The reason that traditional behavior management, and again, for me, and I know for a lot of teachers is not effective, is because we feel like we're on the merry-go-round. We try different strategies. We try different intrinsic, or extrinsic reinforcement. We try different charts. We try different seating arrangements. We try different lessons. We try all these things. Those to me are like sitting on different horses on a merry-go-round. At the end of the day, we are still spinning in circles. We've tried something, it maybe works for a little bit, right? right? We get a different viewpoint and then we're right back where we started. So I started to realize after many years of living on the merry-go-round myself, like there's gotta be something different. Like I've gotta be missing something. And I started to really think about how can we redefine behavior management? Because when we think about classroom and different practices that we have, right? We have restorative practices, we have instructional practices, we have social emotional practices. And yet when it comes to behavior, which to me is really that like umbrella term for everything that we do, it comes down to management, and managing behavior just does not have that longevity. It does not have that transformative change because behavior is a part of us. We are human beings, we behave. And so I started to really figure out, well, I could go one of two ways here. I could keep doing what I've always done and I'm going to keep getting the results I've gotten, or I can try and take a different path. And so I did just that. And I started starting with the word. I do not call it behavior management anymore. It is behavior change practices, because these truly start with honoring who I am as the human being that I am and recognizing that I've decided to walk that different path. Behavior change practices are things that I do as the teacher, as human being Lindsay, because I use these inside and outside of the classroom, but they're practices I do to elicit behavior change within myself to then impact and influence behavior change in others. Recognizing that I cannot change. We've heard that quote probably numerous times, right? Behavior change is an inside job. I can't control anyone else's behavior, but I can impact, influence, I can ignite, I can do so many things, but it all starts with me. So when I think about behavior change practices, things like values come right to the priority. What do I value as a human being? And how can I connect the expectations I have in my classroom for myself, for my students, for my staff? How can I connect that to the values that are truly going to then guide us forward? We're going to honor all emotions. We're honoring emotions are going to come up. We're going to teach about the emotions. I'm going to be recognizing my own emotions. I use energy check-ins throughout the day so that I know if my energy is starting to deplete, if my emotions are starting to get out of alignment. I'm not going to wait till 4 o'clock and I get home and I'm exhausted, which is going to lead to burnout. I'm going to do some small, simple steps during my day to help get me energized back to where I need to be. My focus is not on eliminating anything. It's now on growth and nurturing and nourishment. How can I grow? I want to take a student, and grow their capacity from here to here. What is that going to look like? What skills do I need to learn, or what skills do I get to share from myself so I can help students do just that? Reflection, huge part of the process, right? Because in order to learn through experience, I've got to be able to think through the experiences that I've had and learn what went well, what didn't go so well, what can I learn, what can I try differently? So when I talk about practice, these are truly processes we get to practice every day, which means I'm not going to get it perfect. I'm going to do what I can with what I have. I'm going to reflect and then grow into the next day, and really anchored on that skill development. Where are my students? Where am I? Whoever it is we're looking for, and then what are those steps we are going to take? So when I think about then these behavior change practices, there are many. These are 6 that I truly focus on as like my core. So, and again, many of these may not be, brand new. They might be things that you've heard, and I love that because it's those reminders. It's reasons that we get, and it's that simple reminder of we get to practice these every day, but we've got to make sure that we are practicing them with ourselves first, and that we are honoring the human beings that we get to be as we do the job we love through teaching or through education. So we do relationships, we build relationships for connection, not for compliance. So I'm not building a relationship with my students so that they listen to me. I'm building a relationship so I can connect with them, so that I understand them, so that I know when I give instructions, I know how to give them in a way that they are going to follow them because they understand, but not because I'm the adult and I said so. I look at, human being to human being, mutual respect, and building that. And that has really helped me just experience, the fun aspect of being in a classroom instead of being so strict about the rules. Simply, I'm going to build relationships, holding people accountable, and also meaning I'm going to hold myself accountable through that. The other piece is I had to do a lot of really evolving around the mindset that I held about behavior. I had to really unpack some limiting beliefs about what I thought behavior was and how I was defining it in the classroom. I was, for a long time, I saw behavior as truly only negative things. And like I mentioned, behavior is everything that we do. And so it is helpful things, it's expected things, things, it's unexpected, it's any action that we take. So evolving my mindset around behavior and what it meant also helped me then be able to connect and see change in my students. I started teaching about the brain and realizing how important our brain is to the behaviors that we show. Thinking back to when I was in the classroom years ago, I don't think I had one single lesson on fight, flight, freeze response or the amygdala or what our brain does when we're under stress. And I now, as I'm prepping to go back into the classroom in September, those are the lessons that I'm doing right now. I'm starting to pull together lessons about teaching about the amygdala and teaching about what happens in our bodies when we experience that big emotion, because that is what's going to help a student, even as young as kindergarten, be able to understand this is why my body's responding in that way. It doesn't mean something's wrong with me. It does not mean I'm bad or I'm naughty. It simply means I'm having an experience, and this is what my body is telling me. I have learned the importance of building our support networks. Early on in my career, I thought it was just me. I thought I was meant to do it alone. I thought if I asked for help, that was a sign of weakness. And I didn't know, I didn't want that to be how other people perceived me. Now it's part of the reason I love giving these, types of talks. I love connecting with people. I love being able to say, hey, I've got this problem. What would you do? Let's problem solve together. And just hearing other people's experiences it gives me that reminder that we truly are all in this together, even if I've never met the person before. And we can build support networks for ourselves. We can build them within our school building and our school community. We can build them in our classroom. So really emphasizing that team-based supportive network. The other piece, last two are really using regulation. It's a key, it's kind of a buzzword right now, but really understanding that is an experience, not a location. So I used to think that, okay, we go to the calm down corner to regulate. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be a corner. It could be a walk in the hall. It could be having a drink of water at your desk. It could be some deep breathing. It could be in a sensory room. It could be with a trusted adult. It could be in the corner of your classroom, but that it's truly an experience that we're having versus a single location. And then I mentioned a little bit earlier that reflective practice. If we are not reflecting on the day in a way that is supportive and helpful to us, then it can be really difficult to come back the next day with that fresh start mentality that we hear about. And so finding ways that we can reflect, it could be a simple voice note on your phone. It could be just talking as you're picking up your room at the end of the day and sharing 3 things that went well and 1 thing you're focused on for tomorrow. It could be using a journal. It could be drawing. It could be listening to some music and just kind of thinking and experiencing your day. Picking a way of reflection that works for you is really is key to the process. We all have basic needs. We know that, we hear that, but there aren't just, we often hear about Maslow's, but there's so many now out there that, again, that's like a whole training in and of itself. But when we think about our basic needs, that's really key to understanding where behavior comes from. And so quickly we can use labels that then kind of bring us down or bring our understanding about behavior in not necessarily a clear way. And so to me, the most important label we can ever use in life is that we label ourselves and others as human beings. We are human beings to human beings who want to feel safe, who desire attention and connection, who want to have fun and enjoy life and enjoy the classroom, who will have needs such as hunger, thirst, and this need for sleep, have a belonging, or they want to be understood, and this desire of power and control. These aren't unique to just students that may be demonstrating behavioral difficulties. These are behavior needs that we all have. And so as we're fulfilling them for our students, I always say, look in the mirror, are we fulfilling them for ourselves too? So as I'm creating a classroom that says, okay, what in my classroom can I do to help my students feel safe? I'm simultaneously having the same conversation with myself. What do I need to feel safe? And I'm having that same conversation with my staff. What do you need to feel safe? So that collectively we are creating a classroom community where we all feel safe, where we are all having those basic needs being met. So the difference to our traditional behavior strategies, behavior change practices really have that foundational key to behavior change starts from within. We see behavior as behavior. It is action. We see students and adults as human beings. We hold accountability. This isn't just we get away with behaviors. We hold accountability through that community aspect. And then we build that connection through the thoughts, our feelings, and actions. Because at the end of the day, we take action on what we believe to be true. So if I'm coming into my school day, and I did this for years, saying, today is going to be a hot mess. I have no idea what we're doing. Behaviors are going to be through the roof. I'm so nervous. That's what I found. Those are the behaviors I then saw, because that was my focus, because I didn't believe that I could be a successful teacher. I didn't have the confidence because I didn't have the experience yet to show me that I knew what I was doing. Through reflection, through utilizing these practices, I realized the confidence lies in showing up that next day, in coming back in the face of, this happened yesterday, but that does not have to happen today. By not relying on, those external charts and things that, again, don't always have that long lasting. It might have a short-term effect, but it doesn't have a long lasting effect. I'm going to change my mindset about behavior. I'm going to change my mindset about me and who I am and the human being I'm going to show up as. And that's where I'm now going to drive the action that I'm taking. And this started, one of the things I started really early on was practicing being able to observe versus judge. And it's actually a lot harder than it might seem. So that the observing is just simply seeing or noticing. Whereas judgment is we start to add a story. It's not judging in like a bad way. We simply add our story and our meaning to it. So we'll start with a really kind of simple example. It's summertime, love a good cookout, right? Love a good s'more party. If we were to simply observe this picture, think about what words might come up, right? The observation, what do I see? It's very, very right on the screen, right? I see a flame. I see 3 marshmallows. I see 3 sticks. I see some dark in the bottom. I can't really tell what it is. If I were to say that that's wood, I mean, you can kind of see it on the bottom, but in the corner, I'm making judgment because I'm now starting to almost make that inference of, well, I know in order for there to be heat, there needs to be fire and there must be wood, but I don't actually know that. So observation is truly just, what do you see? And why this is important is because when we do this for behavior, we jump often right into judgment, right? We see a student that may have their head down and we immediately jump into the story. Maybe they didn't get a lot of sleep. They're being disrespectful. They must not like this lesson. And if you're like me, and then you take that and you make it personal, is every kid falling asleep? Am I a bad teacher? How could they do this to me, right? When simply, if I'm teaching and I notice this, I'm going to notice, and this student has their head on their desk. I'm going to check in with them when I have a good pause, and I'm just going to go see what's going on so that I can have them help me with the story, have them give some clarity in the meaning. But being able to truly observe behavior without immediately jumping to judgment has been a game changer for me, because it keeps me present. It doesn't mean that challenging behaviors still don't happen, because they absolutely do, but I'm able to stay a little bit almost disconnected, which I know sounds a little odd because we want to stay connected, but I'm able to disconnect and truly just see and observe it without making it personal, without making a story. And I think that's a really key way to do that. Because when we address behaviors that we see without also evaluating or understanding the beliefs and the ways of being that we have and that there are within that student, that's where we're not going to see, again, I've mentioned it, we want to see that transformative change. Got to understand that the behavior is what we see, but there's so much underneath that we aren't. And that the more that we can observe up here and then gain awareness through connection, through conversation, through observation of the beliefs and the ways of being, that's what's going to help us then create long-lasting change that can happen. I mentioned a little bit earlier that values are so key. So many classrooms have expectations. Mine will too. Those are the actions we desire to see, right? So the expectation is, we walk when we're in the classroom, but we run when we're on the grass, right? Very simple example, but the expectations are what you desire to see, but the values explain the why behind it. So we walk in the classroom as the expectation for the value of safety. Because when we walk, we're in more control of our body, which means that I'm not going to put myself at risk of bumping into somebody or something, and I'm not going to put anyone else at risk. So that value piece is huge because it teaches the why. If you know anything about, little kids, that's one of their favorite words. Well, why? Why do we got to do this? What's the point, right? Even in junior high, when I was an assistant principal there, well, why do we have this rule? Why do we have this expectation? There's many times where students would ask me and we would do a little digging. We'd go into the code of conduct and we would read through it. And they'd be like, but I still don't get it. Why? And I struggled with some of them because it didn't attach to a value. I struggled with that. And so I think it's so important that we do that. One of the first activities I'll be doing, once we're back to school is sort of these things. We'll have our class expectations, we'll have our class values. And so the students can really start to see how do they connect and what is the almost broader purpose to these. That's going to help them take accountability and ownership of the expectations. It's not simply, well, I'm going to do it because she said so. Oh my goodness, keep going the wrong way. There we go. The values that we hold in our classroom and the values we hold for ourselves truly are the light along our path. They help us make decisions. They help us with that foundation. I always think of values like the corner pieces to a puzzle, right? You could do the whole puzzle, but if you don't have those 4 corner pieces, you're kind of missing. You're missing those like anchors. They kind of hold everything together, whether you have a 4-piece puzzle or a 1,000-piece puzzle. And so those values are really your corners, and you be creative with them. This was one that I saw in a math classroom, and this teacher loved C3PO. Like, it was very evident, it was all over the place, and I loved it. But his slogan for his classroom was be one with the force. And I was like, well, that's pretty fun. And so if you look at the left, up and down, it's C, 3 P's, and then an O. And then his values for his classroom are there: to be calm, to be punctual. Sorry, the second P should be prepared. So being prepared, participate, and then to be organized. Now, what I don't have is next to this poster was what those look like. It was like a class rubric. So what calm looked like, and then what being punctual looked like, what being prepared looked like. And so there was really no, even as a stranger to the classroom, I was just coming in to do an observation. I knew what that teacher was looking for based on these values, which was really, really important. So looking a little bit deeper, connection, again, it's a process. It's something that we get to experience, and it is ongoing. It is not a one and done, right? I always use family members for this, right? At no point do I ever want to say, like, I'm not connected to my husband anymore, or I'm not building connection with my husband. We still are, even though I've known him for over 20 years. It is a process. It is something that we do that is ongoing. And so the foundation to connection is creating that safe environment. It is understanding that there's going to be different doors that open. Some students are going to have barriers up. Some students aren't going to want to connect, and that's okay. It's going to be a process, right? So if you think of plants growing, they don't grow overnight. Some take longer. Some need different soil. Some need different water. Some need different sunlight. Students are the same way. I've had students I've worked with just through the nature of previously being a behavior specialist. I've worked with students for years. Some of the kids I can connect on the first day, and we've built a relationship and we keep building it. Other students, it takes years. We're 4 years in and we're still building that connection, and that's okay. With the anchor and that compass guided from compassion and trust, I think those are the pieces that are so important, again, both for ourselves as well as to connect with others. We connect through communication. And I think early in my career, this isn't something that I really recognized as how powerful it was. I always thought, what I was speaking was more important than the other pieces. And now it is important, the language that we use, but it also rests on our facial expressions and our body language and our tone and volume. It can also be through writing, right? And the feedback that we give. Sometimes if we just, we write a word, nice job, for some students, they may be like, great, that's awesome. Somebody else might, but they maybe got a couple wrong. They may be wondering, well, I did a nice job, but what did I get wrong? How could I improve on these? So really looking at what type of communication is helping our students, and recognizing that all aspects of communication are really key. And so now, because I am someone that wears a lot of emotions on her face, that you can tell how I'm feeling by how I'm looking. I'm very aware of that when I'm in a meeting, when I'm in my classroom, when I'm in the hallway, so that I am able to communicate effectively with those that I am interacting with. Implementing, similar to how we said, evidence-based strategies have to start with connection. Implementing these behavior change practices require connection and trust. Because if not, it's like filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom. We use the strategies, we use the practices, but if our students don't trust us, if we don't have any sort of connection with them, then they kind of sink right through. And it's not, I've had someone ask me like, well, what about like the first day of school, right? If I don't know my students yet, and it's not so literal that like there's a huge hole, but there's a tiny hole, right? And so, but if I build connection and trust, even on day one, we're gonna start to see practices help. It's when over time, for longer periods of time, if I am not also building connection and trust, getting to know my kids as kids, letting them get to know me as human being, Lindsay, and not just teacher Lindsay, then that's so important, right? A fun story about that one. I was at the grocery store. This was like last year at some point. And I always thought and kind of knew that like elementary students thought that teachers slept at school and lived at school. But I had a 9th grader. When I saw him at the grocery store, he was like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I'm shopping." And he's like, "Well, for what?" I'm like, "For food, for my family. We're going to go home. I'm going to cook dinner." And he was like, "Man, I just never thought of you like doing that." And I was like, "All right, very cool." Like, it was just so funny. It was like so eye-opening to me that, and this was someone I knew, we had, I would say, kind of started a relationship. We weren't, completely clearly connected. But even with that, he saw me solely as, I was the assistant principal at that time, solely as administrator. And so it was a reminder to me, like, it's okay to share, again, what you're comfortable with, but it is okay to share things about, your family or what you did over the weekend or what your favorite food is or any of those types of things, so that the strategies you're using have that longevity effect that we're looking for. When we think about connection, again, I love acronyms. It's probably the special educator in me. Can't have enough of them. But again, I mentioned it really does start with compassion, remaining open, noticing, right? We gain so much information from noticing. What are they wearing on their shirt? What kind of shoes are they wearing? Do they have a sports bag that they bring? What are they writing about? What are they drawing about? What are they talking to their friends about? Just kind of notice those pieces. Again, that nourish to flourish, that plant concept, really focusing on our own energy and environment, right? What is that's really connected to connection, right? How is our energy coming into the classroom? Recognizing that connection does take a commitment, right? It does take time. I mentioned with some of my kids, it takes a lot longer than others. And that value of trust, knowing that what I say matches what I do, is going to help build trust. And so we want to connect with the student before behavior. These are some ways that we can, again, kind of use strategies. So this is kind of like the how to connection. Again, a lot of them are mindset based, because it's not, if there was one strategy that was going to work for every kid, we wouldn't be here today, right? It's really about finding and building a toolbox for yourself that feels authentically aligned to you and who you desire to be in the classroom. And also then recognizing, though, that different students are going to connect with you in different ways. So with that, though, meet them where they are, not where we think they should be, right? That should concept is key. So where are they right now? And just meet them where they're at. Keep interactions simple and easy and build from there. See and honor the endless possibilities in them. Research shows that 7 seconds is really all it takes to get started. Certainly you're not going to be, 100% connected in 7 seconds, but there is the power of 7 seconds, and it does not take a lot of time to get those connections started. If possible, right, reaching out to home or the peer group, connecting with people around that person, truly listening to learn from them, not to try and give directions or to remind them of the homework or to remind them of something, but simply listening to learning who they are, recognizing how important choice and voice are. And then, sorry, I cannot see that bottom one because of the toolbar. And then recognizing their student strengths. So building in those student strengths to the classroom. I kept this in here. This was actually from a different training that I did, but it's something that often comes up with behavior is motivation, and how do I motivate my students? And when it comes to behavior change practices, and again, this is something that talk about the whole adult, like I'm not 100% motivated all the time, and neither are our kids. So there's no human being out there that is ever motivated 100% of the time. So I actually recommend that instead of focusing on motivation as the outcome, right? How do I get them motivated? Prioritize showing them what is possible for them, right? Like by learning this skill, by doing this activity, by completing this task, whatever it is, show them what's possible through the use of the proactive strategies that are going to increase their autonomy, right? Their feeling of control, their feeling of this is who I am and I can do this, their feeling of success, and having some degree of control. Again, some, not the entire thing, but through that voice and choice. So, because when we try and focus on motivation, we're going to have students that aren't motivated. I mean, again, there's things that even within my job that I love that I'm not motivated to do. I do them because I know by doing them, it's going to help me get here. And so I focus on that versus actually trying to motivate myself to do the task. As we dive into, I'm just going to skip ahead just a little bit. When we think about creating this awareness with behaviors, one of the things that I think is really important is this is where we can use our experience to help us. So I call it prevent with a purpose. And so early in the school year, use your experience and be honest with your students about behaviors you've seen. Now, don't be so honest that you're like saying names or getting into like nitty-gritty details, but something like, if behaviors, and again, depending on the grade that you are teaching, you're going to get probably more specific or less specific. So, but you're going to let your students know that you're there to be teaching. You're there to be supportive. You're there to be a coach, right? Whichever words that resonate with you. But let them know ahead of time what you're going to do if and when behaviors happen. You can let them know, sometimes we come into school and we are tired. And so if I see a student with their head down, I'm going to keep teaching, guys. Like, this is what I'm here to do. I'm here to teach. I'm going to check in on them. And I'm going to let them know, I'm going to check in after so that I can make sure they're okay or see how I can help them. Where this helps is it then sometimes when I say that, like, just keep teaching, like, don't address it in the moment. I get, well, what if every other kid then copies that behavior or starts to do that behavior? But when you've set the foundation of, you understand that sometimes their basic needs are important and that they're feeling safe, then you check in with them, with that student afterwards, then you can create that plan. Then you can start to build that awareness instead of stopping your lesson, addressing everything that needs to be addressed. We can find a time and a place to do that. Now, if it's active and it's interrupting instruction, then again, ideally in the first couple weeks of school, we've said, if I do need to stop instruction, here's what that might look like, so that you are then putting that plan into action by letting the student know, I want you here. I want you a part of this class. You are a part of our class community. But right now it looks like this, and whatever it is impacting your ability to be here. So what would help you get back to your baseline? What would help you? The more that we teach students about that vocabulary, about their brain, about behaviors and what it's doing for them, more likely we are going to be able to reach them sooner so that disruption does not continue to increase. So recognizing that, we're going to teach and set those boundaries. I like to look at them as circular because there's going to be some things that you can have a little bit more like leeway with. So something, maybe if you use flexible seating, for example, your boundary for seating might be a little bit bigger, right? Like, as long as you are not disruptive, as long as it's a good learning spot for you, have at it, right? For something that's like safe, your boundary is going to be a real small circle, because safety, again, is that priority. It can be a nice way to help students visualize with that boundary. That also works for setting boundaries for ourselves. Where do I have a bigger boundary and where do I not? And so, something like working hours, right? For teachers, that's it's a big one that comes up. What is your boundary with working hours? Some are contract start time, contract end time. If that works for you, that's great. It personally doesn't work for me, but I give myself about a 30-minute buffer on either window. And so that works for me. So I'm not working 16-hour days like I did when I first started, but I'm also not trying to rush and only work this certain time frame. I figured out a boundary that can be flexible, that works for me and my family. And so that's something that I'm always thinking about as I'm using behavior change practices in my classroom, is how does this also apply to life outside of the classroom? Because that's really important too. Again, I apologize. I know I threw kind of a bunch on here. So again, when we have these next two slides, are really refusal is probably the top behavior that comes up through my consultation work and again, that can look a variety of ways. So I break it into two main categories. We have active, and that's more of the disruptive. It's what you can hear. It's what you can see. It impacts the greater classroom. And so some things that I have found helpful for that is using movement, the student movement, to your advantage. So they want to move. When they're doing active refusal, this usually involves like running around the classroom, throwing items, and it could be bigger than that, but using movement. So how is their body regulating with movement? How are they someone that maybe needs, instead of the worksheet on the desk or the activity on the desk, do they need it taped to the wall? Do they need a standing desk where they can pace as they work? Do they maybe need 2 seats in the classroom and they can move from, either seat so that they have movement, they have the ability to move. You can also use movement to their advantage by identifying things that they are moving to, right? Are they so quick to move to lunch because they're starving? Do we need to add in maybe an AM snack before lunch? Are they moving really fast to gym because it's their favorite place and they love that teacher? Could they start their day in the gym just saying hey to the coach and starting their day that way? Celebrating small victories. So again, any kind of small win that they have, bringing awareness to that and noticing that. And then again, using their strengths to build the skills that they don't currently have. When it's more passive, meaning kind of internal, it's really not impacting anybody else, but it's impacting their learning. These are the kids with the head down, maybe go to the bathroom for the whole class, maybe skip class, those kinds of things. Again, finding those moments of connection, finding opportunities to connect on that human being level, focusing on their effort over the end product. So what effort have they maybe, are going to leave class for 20 minutes, but they showed up. So focusing on, hey, so happy to see you here today. Thanks for coming. I appreciate you being here. And then again, just checking in, doesn't have to be every day, all day, but checking in on those basic needs to make sure that there isn't something that they need that isn't being met for them. Class schedules are huge. They help with executive functioning. They help us as educators stay organized, and they help our students know what to expect. And so this could look a variety of ways. You can have your class schedule. I also then like to use activity mini schedules. So, math is at this time, but here's what we're doing for math. Transition, letting kids know, especially if you have a student that struggles with them, breaking down the transition into different steps so they can visually see it. I will be using play schedules with my students because I know a lot of them coming in don't have strong play or leisure skills. So we will be using, and so it's not usually their thing that they pick to do because they don't know how. So we'll be using different schedules to help teach those play concepts so that we can hopefully increase their repertoire of different leisure activities. Again, visuals are huge. When I went to Europe, actually after my first year of teaching, I gifted myself with a trip to Europe for surviving and making it through. This type of visual saved me because so many times I was looking the other way for traffic, but they're driving on the other side of the street. And so I needed that visual reminder to help me pause and take in my environment. And that's really what visuals can do in the classroom. So if you find yourself sounding like a broken record, if you are saying the same thing over and over again, create a visual for it. That could be a word, it could be a picture. I will be using visuals like for what tools students need, because there's nothing more frustrating than telling a kid to get a pencil out 10 times. So there'll be a picture of a pencil on my whiteboard. There'll be a picture of, a folder if they need a certain folder, so that now I'm increasing their independence by teaching them where to look versus having to just repeat myself. So these are all types of strategies that, again, they're helping us with this understanding of behavior change practices. I'm helping students practice changing their own behavior. So instead of relying on the adult to tell them 800 times what is next or what tool they need, I'm teaching them a system that they can use to do it for themselves. And so I think that's really, really key. One thing I want to make sure just to go through briefly is co-regulation, because so applicable to the work that we do with behaviors. And again, if we're talking about the whole adult, we've got to know how to honor our emotions. So similar to connection, regulation is the same thing. It is a process. It is something we experience, and it is filled with actions that we take. I look at it through a 4R process. So the first step is when we have students escalating, the goal isn't to immediately get them back into learning. It's to get them back into what I call their baseline boundary. So back into where they are at baseline so that we can then move up the pathway, if you will. So the first step of that is that co-regulation. But before we can help a student regulate, we've got to know how to regulate ourselves. So everything that I'm going to share on these next few slides, we've also got to practice outside of the classroom too, because just like I can't teach a student or a child to swim in the middle of the ocean, I can't teach myself to swim in the middle of the ocean. I can't teach regulation when I'm dysregulated. So I've got to practice being aware of my emotions, knowing when my emotions are starting to arise, and being able to bring it back into the present. So when I started learning how to do that outside of the classroom and just in my own, space where I was comfortable, I was able to then start doing it in the classroom. So first we regulate, then we reflect through with the student what happened. We repair and restore any harm that may have been done, and then the re-enter or re-engage. Now, these last three, depending on time, depending on your schedule, things, they might be kind of intermixed. That's okay. But we want to make sure that each part happens so that we are helping with the behavior pathway of teaching a different way to respond when that emotion happens. So again, co-regulation is an experience involving two people, and it's not scripted. That's the other thing I get, like, well, can you just tell me what to say? I can't script it because it really is individualized for each student. So here are some things. I'll just have you look at them as I kind of touch on them. What to think. So we break down co-regulation, what to think, what to say, and what to do. You will notice most, if not all of these, have to do with you. So the first thing, when we are thinking, we have got to make sure that we are focusing on, what am I feeling? What is my body telling me? How do I want the student? How do I think they feel? How do I want them to feel? How can I show them that? This is all about those internal thoughts, because we know our thoughts lead to the actions we then take. So I might be thinking, how can I modify the environment? Can I turn my lights down? Can I call for help? What is my body language saying? What are the anchor thoughts, right? Are the thoughts in my head like, here we go again. I can't believe we're doing this again. This is so frustrating. That's going to lead to me getting dysregulated, which is not going to help with regulation. So instead, when my anchor thoughts then are, I'm doing the best that I can, I'm going to keep breathing and stay present, I'm going to help as best I can, right? When I have those thoughts that are then going to bring me back to the present moment, I'm going to be more likely to stay regulated. Also know, if you become dysregulated, that's absolutely a normal reaction. That is a human being reaction. When we are in an environment that has chaos, that's unsafe, that we're uncertain in, again, our amygdala goes into fight, flight, or freeze. And so awareness of that sometimes that's the language. My amygdala has been triggered right now. I'm going to breathe. I'm self-talking myself through this so that I can stay as present as possible. The what to do, you'll notice these lists get smaller because there's less to do and there's even more less to say. We are going to breathe. We've got to breathe. We got to keep breathing, because the first thing we do is tense up, and then our hormones, our nervous system is completely out of whack. So I'm also, by breathing, I'm keeping my nervous system in check, but I'm also modeling for the student something they can be doing without adding a demand on and saying, let's deep breathe together. I'm just doing it. I'm going to create space. So if they're over in the corner, I'm going to be over here. I'm not going to be right near them. I'm creating space to reduce that stimulation. Again, major piece is keeping yourself regulated. And so that's why when I talked about at the beginning, how a lot of these we could go deeper, that's an entire kind of training in and of itself, right? How do I regulate myself? The first thing to start with is breathing. That is the number one thing that I have found that has been most successful in regulating myself, is to truly breathe, those deep breaths. What to say? We're not saying much. So if and when we do, we're reflecting the feeling. We're going to empathize with their experience. Like, this is really hard. I get that this is really tough. We're going to acknowledging that they're hurt, that something is hurting them, that their emotions were hurt. And if we can, in a genuine way, apologize, right? I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that we're here. I'm here to help you through this feeling. That's it. Because when they're regulated, they're not in their thinking brain. They're in their emotional brain, their survival brain. They're not hearing what we're saying anyway. So we want to get them back into their thinking brain so that we can then help them through the process. When they start to show signs of calm, whatever that looks like for the student, once they're in control, when they can follow maybe some simple, ones that, hey, let's get a drink of water, let's sit down here, they're more engaging with you, then that's showing that they're back into their thinking brain or starting to get there. So we can start reflecting and moving through with that process. So looking at, kind of time, I think I wanted to touch on most of those pieces. Again, I'm happy to share this because there's quite a bit in here that, I just kind of wanted to go through, but so important. This last part is really just about those emotions and honoring our own emotions. And so again, that noticing piece, like we talked about in the beginning, actually, here. So when we have an emotion and then we feel something about that emotion, we almost then want to identify with it. So as an example, this was one I lived in for years. Like I would get frustrated about something, and then I was frustrated that I was frustrated, which then led to like what I call shouldville thoughts. Like, well, I shouldn't be frustrated. I should know what to do. Why is this so difficult? I can't do this, right? I'd have these like huge kind of overreactions to them. Overwhelmed is just part of who I am. It's just part of this. When I learned instead to release it, I'm noticing I'm frustrated. So I accept right now, I accept what's happening. This frustration is connected because I just received this news or I just got something else thrown on my plate, and I can also release it. I can breathe through and release. That emotion doesn't become a part of me. It's simply something that I am experiencing. And so these are, again, when I can do that, then I can help share that with my students as well, by also then being able to do these three things: starting where you are, using what you have, doing what you can. We are not meant to do it all. We are meant to be human beings enjoying life, who have chosen to, and part of that enjoyment to be teaching and education. But if we start to not enjoy it, it so quickly comes into life outside of the classroom. And so for me, it is so, so important to, again, prioritize behavior change practices so that we're not focused on being perfect. We're not focused on getting it right, but instead we're simply focused on the process and the practice of being present with ourselves and our students.